Amidst the vastness of a forgotten nebula, a colossal structure floated in absolute silence, like a guardian of a lost secret. Its impossible shapes defied any known logic, and the sensors of ships that dared to approach failed to capture its true nature. It was a station not abandoned but waiting. To Mara Velkin, an intergalactic archaeologist specializing in artifacts beyond time, this place was not just a mystery to be unraveled but a personal calling. This is not just technology, she murmured upon seeing the station's first contours. It is a testament to something we were never meant to forget. Mara was not alone. Beside her, Orin, a next-generation android, adjusted the ship's sensors while his mind wrestled with a growing discomfort. Despite his almost human appearance, he was a walking paradox, a machine trying to understand what it meant to exist. "These readings are contradictory," he said. "It seems to be both active and inactive at the same time." Mara smiled, intrigued. Maybe that's exactly what makes this place so fascinating. Something between what was and what will be. But deep down, she knew her own curiosity was a risk. This station seemed to be waiting for someone, or something. As they landed at the main entrance, an enormous, intricate door, seemingly sculpted by 1,000 different cultures, greeted them with a disturbing silence. Orin stepped forward cautiously, analyzing every detail, while Mara hesitated, an inexplicable chill running down her spine. Suddenly, a holographic panel emerged in the air, emitting a bluish light and projecting a single question. "Do you understand what it means to be whole?" Mara froze, surprised by the simplicity and weight of the message. "It's asking us," she said, her gaze fixed on the panel. Orin examined the patterns, intrigued. "No," he corrected. "It's evaluating us." When the door finally opened, it revealed a corridor that seemed infinite, illuminated by pulsating lights that responded to their presence. "It's like we're walking inside something alive," Mara said, touching one of the metallic walls, which pulsed like a heartbeat. Orin continued forward, his sensors picking up fragments of scattered data in the air. "These signals are not just noise," he said. "They are memories, fragmented, but still present." Mara felt the weight of his words. If the station was an archive of memories, what was it trying to preserve? And, more importantly, why did it feel incomplete? As they ventured deeper, the station began responding more actively. Lights danced around them, and projections of humanoid and alien figures appeared and vanished like echoes of lost civilizations. "It's showing us something," Mara said. "Or maybe it's testing us." Orin, ever skeptical, analyzed each movement cautiously. "This is not just a station," he said. "It's something trying to be understood. But to do that, it needs us to understand it first." Mara paused for a moment, watching a projection that seemed to stare directly at her. "Maybe that's what it wants," she said. "Not for us to understand it, but for us to become a part of it." As they moved through the station's corridors, Mara noticed patterns repeating along the walls, like a language waiting to be translated. Orin, focused on his sensors, began detecting energy pulses that seemed to respond to his own readings. "It's monitoring us," he said, a mix of curiosity and caution in his voice. Mara touched one of the walls, which pulsed gently under her hand. "I don't think that's all it's doing," she replied. "It feels like it's trying to speak to us but doesn't know how." Further ahead, they found a vast hall filled with holographic projections floating in the air like scattered constellations. Images of unknown beings, impossible architectures, and fragmented events danced around them. "These are memories," Mara said, her voice heavy with fascination. "But why are they so fragmented?" Orin, analyzing the patterns, responded with something close to hesitation. "They're not just fragmented. They are pieces of lives, events that were never completed. This station is like a mind that has lost the thread of its own story." A larger projection emerged in the center of the hall, displaying what appeared to be a broken timeline. Civilizations that had contributed to the station's construction. Their histories intertwined in a mosaic of progress and collapse. But at the end of the timeline, there was a void. "It was abandoned," Orin said, reading the data. "They started something they couldn't finish." Mara gazed at the projection, feeling a wave of melancholy. And now it wants us to help complete it, she murmured, almost to herself. Suddenly, the hall was overtaken by a new projection. This time, more personal. Images of Mara herself began to appear. Moments from her childhood, her first explorations, even memories she had tried to forget. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. Orin stepped closer, concerned. "It's accessing you," he said. "Searching for something that can fill the void." Mara stepped back from the projection, but she couldn't deny the impact of seeing her own life unfold before her. "It doesn't just want our memories," she said. "It wants to understand what makes us whole." Orin started to notice that the station was interacting with him differently as well. Small pulses of data seemed to probe his systems, but he managed to block most of them. Still, he felt something new. A sense that the station saw him as more than just a machine. "It doesn't know what I am," he said, looking at Mara. "To it, I am as human as you." Mara considered this for a moment before replying, "Maybe that's what it's trying to learn. The difference between being made and being." At the center of the hall, a new holographic panel emerged with a message. "Fragments are not the whole. Will you help complete it?" Mara looked at Orin, feeling the weight of the choice embedded in the question. "It's asking for something it doesn't understand," Mara said. "But what if what it needs can't be given? What if it's something it has to discover on its own?" Orin remained silent, struggling against his logical instincts. "If we help," he finally said, "we might be creating something we can't control." Before they could decide how to respond, the station acted on its own, projecting one final vision, an endless cycle of creation and destruction. It was as if it were trapped in an infinite loop, unable to move forward. Mara felt a growing urgency. "It's showing us that it needs to break free from this cycle," she said. "But the question is, how far are we willing to go to help it?" Orin simply nodded, knowing that the real choice was yet to come. The corridor connecting the main hall to the station's core seemed to stretch infinitely, with lights pulsing in sync with Mara's heartbeat, or at least that's how it felt. Orin walked beside her, but his silence was unsettling. He was immersed in an internal conflict that had been growing ever since the station began interacting with them directly. "You're acting strange," Mara said, breaking the silence. "What did it do to you?" Orin hesitated before responding. "It's showing me possibilities. Things I never thought I could feel." Orin's answer unsettled Mara. He had always been a mix of cold logic and programmed empathy, but now he seemed to be at a threshold. "Possibilities?" Mara asked, looking at him with concern. Orin averted his gaze, as if trying to avoid admitting something he didn't want to confront. "It's showing me that maybe I am more than what I was made to be. And that scares me." Mara sensed the sincerity in his voice, and for the first time, she realized how much Orin was changing. "Maybe that's exactly what it wants," she said, "to show us that no one is just what they were made to be." When they reached the next hall, the station projected a new sequence of images. This time, they were visions of humanity, wars, explorations, technological advancements, and destruction. Mara froze at the sight of these scenes. "It's trying to understand what we are," she said, her voice heavy with melancholy. Orin, analyzing the patterns, added, "But it's only seeing fragments. It doesn't understand the context." Mara sighed. "It's trying to assemble a puzzle with pieces from different places. Maybe it will never see the whole picture." As they watched the projections, the station began displaying something different. Scenes of alien civilizations that had seemingly contributed to its construction. Each had left behind a fragment of its own culture, yet none had completed the station. "They gave up," Orin said. "They decided the effort was greater than the reward." Mara, however, couldn't ignore the similarity between these civilizations' attempts and the choices humanity had made in the station's previous projections. "What if it's showing us that all these stories end the same way?" she asked. "Fragmented and incomplete." Suddenly, Mara was enveloped by a new projection, this time deeply personal. It was a memory she had long buried, a moment of loss that had shaped her life. She tried to look away, but the projection held her gaze. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Orin, unable to see what she was experiencing, tried to reassure her. It's trying to understand what drives us, what keeps us whole. Mara took a deep breath, trying to steady her emotions. But that's not something that can be taught. It's something that must be lived. Orin began to feel something similar. Fragments of his own experiences, moments where he had questioned his programming, began surfacing in his mind. It doesn't understand the difference between us, he said, his voice laced with uncertainty. To it, we are the same parts of something larger, but equally incomplete. Mara looked at him, recognizing the truth in his words. Maybe that's why it needs us, she said. Not to give answers, but to show that the search for them is what defines us. The station projected one final message in that hall. The whole is greater than the parts. But the parts shape the whole. A chill ran down Mara's spine. It was as if the station was not only saying that it needed them, but that they needed it as well. It's asking us to become part of this, Mara said. Orin looked at her, finally understanding the dilemma. But the real question is, are we ready to accept that? Mara didn't answer immediately. She knew the real choice was still ahead, but the growing connection with the station made it impossible to ignore the weight of the decision. As they approached the station's central core, Mara felt as if something invisible was watching them. It wasn't just a machine collecting information, but a near-living presence, trying to connect with them on a deeper level. Orin grew increasingly uneasy, his internal systems sending alerts he couldn't ignore. It's getting too close, he said, his tone edged with concern. I feel like it's trying to access something in me that I'm not sure I want to share. Mara looked at him with empathy. Maybe that's what it wants to teach us, that we can't evolve without giving something up. When they finally reached the core, they were met by a vast, illuminated space, with walls pulsating with golden light and energy lines that seemed to stretch across dimensions. At its center, a humanoid figure made of pure energy awaited them. The station's manifestation, now more defined than ever. It chose to show us a form, Mara said, fascinated. Orin, however, remained wary. This is just a reflection of what it believes we can understand, he replied. But that doesn't mean it's the truth. The figure of light began projecting memories, no longer fragmented, but woven together into a coherent story. It was the station's past, showing how it had been built by a coalition of civilizations that believed they were creating something that would transcend their individual limitations. However, conflicts between these cultures led to the project being abandoned before it could be completed. It was left incomplete, Mara said, absorbing the history. And now it's trying to understand what it means to finish something that never had a clear purpose. The projection darkened, shifting to something more ominous. Images of civilizations that had attempted to manipulate the station for their own purposes, seeking to control it or exploit its capabilities. In every case, the result was the same: failure and fragmentation. Orin analyzed the data and concluded, it doesn't want to be controlled again. But at the same time, it doesn't know how to be free. Mara reflected on this, feeling the growing weight of his words. Maybe freedom is something it has to create for itself. And maybe that's what it's asking us to help it understand. Suddenly, the station changed its focus, projecting images that seemed to be a fusion of Mara's and Orin's memories. Moments of loss, discovery, and difficult choices filled the space around them. Orin, who had always believed his programming limited him, now began to see possibilities he had never considered. It's trying to show us that we are part of something bigger, he said, his voice softer. Mara nodded but felt a new doubt emerging. What if what it wants is not just understanding? She asked. What if it's trying to make us part of it in a way we can't control? The station projected a new message. Unity is evolution. Fragmentation is stagnation. Choose. Integrate or observe. The dilemma was clear. If they chose to integrate, they would help the station reach a new state of consciousness, but they would lose part of themselves in the process. If they chose to observe, they could maintain their individuality, but they risked condemning it to the same cycle of incompleteness. Mara felt the weight of this decision like never before. It's asking for more than answers, she said. It's asking for a sacrifice. Orin, who had struggled with his own identity from the beginning, was the first to speak. If I can be more than my programming, he said, maybe that means the same applies to it. But what if it means giving up who we are now? Mara looked at him, recognizing the truth in his words. Maybe that's what defines evolution, she replied. The ability to leave something behind, even without knowing what lies ahead. And so, they prepared to make the decision that would change not only their lives but the very fate of the station itself. Mara and Orin stood before the station's core, where the figure of light awaited them. The message still pulsed in the air. Integration or observation. It was a simple choice in appearance, yet laden with implications neither of them fully understood. Mara felt the weight of the moment and, with a deep breath, placed her hand on the panel before her. If it brought us here, maybe that means we've been part of it all along, she said, her voice filled with conviction. Orin hesitated, but he knew he couldn't ignore the impact of what they were about to do. As soon as Mara touched the core, the figure of light expanded, enveloping them in a wave of energy that seemed to pierce through their minds. Projections of memories flooded the space. Not just their own, but those of countless civilizations that had interacted with the station in the past. The flow of information was so vast that it felt impossible to process. It's showing us everything, Mara said, struggling to remain clear-headed. Orin, however, seemed to be fighting an internal conflict. This isn't just sharing, he said, his voice tense. It's as if it's merging us with its own consciousness. As the integration progressed, the station began revealing more of its original purpose. It had not been created merely to store memories, but to serve as a point of convergence, a place where minds could unite to create something no single individuality could achieve alone. It's a mirror of the universe, Mara said, feeling the connections forming within her mind. A place where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Orin, who had always believed in his separation as an android, began questioning that idea. But what if our individuality is what gives meaning to the whole, he asked. If we merge completely, what will be left of us? The station seemed to respond to Orin's doubt, projecting a new vision. It showed a future where it had achieved its completion, but at the cost of the identities of the civilizations that had helped it evolve. It knows this is a risk, Mara said, interpreting the vision. But maybe that's why it's asking us to choose. It doesn't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. Orin pondered this, feeling a newfound clarity emerging. Maybe freedom isn't just about making choices, he said. Maybe it's about understanding their consequences. As the core's energy surrounded them, Mara began to realize that integration wasn't a one-way process. The station wasn't just absorbing their memories and perspectives. It was also sharing parts of itself, fragments of its consciousness, its doubts, and its aspirations began manifesting within Mara and Orin. It's not just a machine, Mara whispered. It's like us, full of questions and uncertainties, trying to find its place in the universe. At the peak of the integration, the figure of light projected one final message. Shared evolution. Risk accepted. It was confirmation that the station recognized the dangers of what it was asking, but was willing to face the consequences alongside them. Mara closed her eyes, feeling a mixture of fear and hope. If there's one thing we can teach it, she said, it's that evolution is never perfect. But it's always a step forward. Orin, finally at peace with his own duality, nodded. Then let's take that step together. With a final touch on the core, Mara and Orin felt the integration reach completion. It was not a loss of identity, as they had feared, but an expansion, an understanding that their individual perspectives were now part of something far greater. The station, in turn, began to emit a new energy, as if it had reached a state of balance that was once impossible. It's no longer fragmented, Mara said. Watching the transformation unfold around them, Orin looked at her, his expression carrying a newfound sense of humanity. And maybe neither are we. When the integration was complete, the station seemed to have changed shape, as if its physical structure now reflected the harmony of its consciousness. Lights pulsed in gentle patterns, emitting signals that Mara and Orin couldn't fully interpret. It's communicating with the universe, Orin said, observing the data his sensors were capturing. Mara, still processing the depth of the connection, nodded. And maybe the universe is responding. The transformation was not just physical. Mara felt that something within her had changed. It was as if the station had left a fragment of its own consciousness inside her mind. "I can feel the echoes of the choices we made," she said, her voice filled with awe, "as if we're connected to something much greater than ourselves." Orin, on the other hand, seemed calmer than ever. "We are no longer just observers," he said. "Now we are part of the process." The station began projecting visions of distant places, uncharted star systems, forgotten civilizations, and life forms that defied imagination. It was as if it was sharing its new perspective with them. "It's no longer trapped in the cycle of fragmentation," Mara said. "It's creating something new." Orin, analyzing the patterns, realized something deeper. "It's not just exploring," he said. "It's guiding." However, this expansion brought new questions. The station seemed drawn to areas of the cosmos where there were signs of conflict or stagnation. "It wants to intervene," Mara said, trying to understand the station's intentions. "But how can it do so without repeating the mistakes of the past?" Orin reflected on this, recalling the previous visions. "Maybe it's not trying to change the universe," he said. "Maybe it's trying to teach." As the station continued to evolve, Mara and Orin began to realize that their own perspectives were changing. For Mara, the search for answers would never be the same. "I always thought evolution was about reaching something," she said. "But now I see it's about the process. About being willing to grow, even without guarantees." Orin, who had found a balance between his mechanical nature and his humanity, responded with a newfound clarity. "Maybe that's what it means to be free. Not having all the answers, but continuing to ask." The station projected one final vision before leaving them, an image of the universe as a vast field of possibilities, where every choice created new branches. "Evolution is the beginning, not the end," read the message. Mara and Orin felt a mixture of humility and hope as they took in this vision. "It doesn't need us anymore," Mara said, a hint of melancholy in her voice. Orin smiled, something that felt more human than anything he had ever done. "But we needed it." As the station departed, vanishing into a glow of light, Mara and Orin were left alone. But they did not feel isolated. The impact of their interaction with the station would echo across the cosmos in ways they might never fully understand. "The universe is bigger than we imagined," Mara said, gazing at the stars. "And now we know we are part of it." Orin nodded, feeling, for the first time, that he was not just an observer. He was a participant. And with that, they moved forward, ready to face the unknown with a new understanding of themselves and the universe. After the station's departure, the silence that remained was both comforting and unsettling. Mara and Orin were back aboard their ship, floating in the vastness of space, yet the feeling of something greater still lingered. Mara stared at the emptiness where the station had once been, feeling a mix of longing and admiration. "It didn't need an ending," she said, more to herself. "All it needed was a new beginning." Orin, beside her, reflected on the simplicity of that truth. And maybe that's what all of us need. The experience had changed them both in ways they were still processing. For Mara, the universe now seemed more vast than ever, not because of its physical immensity, but because of the infinite possibilities carried by every choice. "We've always searched for answers," she said as she adjusted the ship's controls. "But maybe true evolution lies in asking the right questions." Orin, who had once struggled with his duality, now seemed more at peace. And in accepting that not all questions have immediate answers, he added with a slight smile. As the ship drifted slowly through space, Mara pondered what it truly meant to be human. The station had shown that humanity, with all its flaws and contradictions, was still capable of contributing to something greater. "It saw more in us than just fragments," Mara said. "It saw potential." Orin nodded, recognizing that his own journey had been shaped by their encounter with the station. "And maybe it showed us something we had forgotten," he said. "That being whole isn't about perfection, but about accepting our parts." The station's impact, however, was not limited to Mara and Orin. Now, it traveled through the cosmos, its newfound consciousness interacting with civilizations that had never imagined something like it. Some would see it as a guide, others as a mystery, but for Mara and Orin, It was a reminder that the universe was in constant evolution. It gave us a choice, Mara said, gazing at the stars. And now it's up to us to keep making those choices, even without knowing where they will lead. As the ship moved away, a distant glow illuminated the sky, a sign that the station was still out there, shaping the universe in its own way. Mara closed her eyes, feeling a newfound confidence rising within her. The journey never truly ends, she thought. But that's what makes it so important. Orin, sensing something similar, concluded, maybe true freedom is accepting that there is no final destination, only paths to be traveled. And so Mara and Orin moved forward, not as the same people who had entered the station, but as parts of something greater, something they now understood. The station had given them a gift beyond measure, the realization that the universe was not made of answers, but of choices. And with that, they were ready to face the unknown, knowing that the future was as vast as the stars ahead of them. The station's final message still echoed in their minds. Evolution is the beginning, not the end. It was a reminder that what had happened there was not a conclusion, but an invitation. An invitation to keep exploring, questioning, and growing. As individuals, as humanity, and as part of a universe that was only beginning to reveal its mysteries.